Hi, I'm John Van Sommeren, and this in-house software training module covers all you need to know about recurring payments. The recurring payments feature is needed when a tenant agrees to pay their landlord a set amount of money at a fixed frequency, such as when signing a standing order. The whole topic of tenant transactions takes 2 training modules. The first one is an introduction and covers concepts and how to post debits and credits. This one covers the additional topic of recurring payments. The recurring payments feature tells the in-house software when to expect each payment. The recurring payments dashboard notifies you when these expected payments don't materialize, and the recurring payments toolbox helps you chase up the tenant. If you're viewing this module in PowerPoint and want it in full screen mode, right mouse click now to see the context menu and select the full screen option. Once in full screen mode, you can use the letter S to start and stop the module at any point. Letters N and P take you to the next and the previous slides respectively, and function key F1 lists all the available keyboard shortcuts. So, on with the show. Slides change automatically if you're using PowerPoint in full screen mode. There is a training prerequisite module called Tenant Transactions Intro. Before you view the present module, you should be familiar with the 4 categories of tenant account, how and why to post debits and credits, and how to view and print statements. Let's have a definition of a recurring payment. It's a written agreement by the tenant to pay the landlord a set amount of money at a fixed frequency. Each payment from the tenant is referred to as an installment, just as it would be if the tenant was repaying a bank loan. The tenant must sign an installment letter. This letter to the landlord, produced automatically by the in-house software, is the tenant's formal agreement to the recurring payment plan, and it shows the start date, the installment amount, and the installment frequency. This letter gives the landlord the legal right to chase missing payments. If the tenant's bank accepts them, the tenant must also sign a standing order form, also computer-produced. The signed copies of the letters and the standing order must be scanned and attached to the Managed Tenancies form. Fresh Start will arrange to deliver the signed original standing order to the tenant's bank. Again, the tenant only gets photocopies. Let's look at the features within the in-house software for handling recurring payments. The main data entry form is called Manage Recurring Payments. Saving the form also prints the installment letter and the standing order if you click the check boxes to say that you want them. Within the in-house software, each expected installment is shown by posting to the tenant account an automatically generated debit. The tenant's corresponding payment, if and when it comes, and it will be seen in the landlord's bank statement first, must be posted to the in-house software as a credit with a cross-reference to the transaction ID of the recurring payment. Computer processing. There's quite a lot of computer processing involved in recurring payments. Each recurring payment on file is checked overnight to see if an installment is due the next working day. And if an installment is due, then the computer generates a debit and posts it in that tenant's account. The computer also generates overnight the recurring payments dashboard. This shows all recurring payments which need chasing up because the tenant has missed one or more installments. All this is covered in the next few slides, but before we get on to that in particular, let's go and have a look at what to do when the landlord's bank statement shows that an installment has arrived. How to handle payments from the tenants. Some tenants will have a standing order. Other tenants will pay by electronic banking, and yet others will go to their post office and ask them to do the bank transfer for them. Whichever way the tenant sends the installment, it first shows up on the landlord's bank statement, hopefully showing the reference that you typed in when you set up the recurring payment. The user who is checking the bank statement must then post a credit to the tenant's account using the transaction ID of the recurring payment as a cross-reference. The value date will be the date the money appeared in the landlord's bank statement. If the tenant comes to the office and pays cash, then the user giving the receipt must post the credit with the transaction ID of the recurring payment as the reference. Transaction ID and the value date must be the date the cash was received. Let's have a look at the in-house software's menu for recurring payments. This is the Tenant Transactions menu. This menu is new in version 7 of the in-house software. Previous versions had an accounting menu instead, where transactions could be posted and recurring debits, as they were then called, could be entered and saved. The new forms shown here are replacements for those earlier forms and are intended to be simpler. There are 5 forms on this menu. The form Tenant Transactions Register has always been around. Previously it was to be found on the accounting menu. Managed Transactions. This is very similar to the one found on the accounting menu, and it was covered in detail in the introductory training module. The forms which are new for recurring payments are Manage Recurring Payments. This is described and demonstrated in the next couple of slides. Recurring Payments Dashboard. This shows all recurring payments which are not up to date with credits in the tenant. And Recurring Payments Toolbox. This is used to chase up tenants who appear on the dashboard. These features will all be covered in this training module. Users familiar with the Housing Benefit Dashboard and the Housing Benefit Toolbox should feel at home when they see the equivalent new forms for recurring payments. Let's have a look at the form Manage Recurring Payments. This is the first of several slides looking at the form. The next slide is a demonstration, so let's review the important features of the form before seeing it demonstrated. The form is split into 2 halves across here. The bottom part is a datasheet which initially shows all recurring payments for all tenants. When you select a row in the datasheet, it is shown in the form's upper part. There are only a few recurring payments in the system at the moment. Normally the recurring debits of all the tenants will completely fill the bottom half of the screen, so use the Select Tenancy button to select the tenant you're interested in, and all the other recurring payments will vanish off the datasheet. To add a new recurring payment, click the New Payment button. Don't try to use the datasheet part of the form to add new data. This is allowed in the introductory model for posting simple debits and credits, but it doesn't work on this form. The previous module described how to post debits and credits to an account. This form allows you to tell the in-house software about when to expect payments, and the in-house software will generate the debits for you from the information you provide on this form. It's therefore not surprising that the same data is required as if posting a simple debit. Also required is the start date, the frequency, and optionally an end date. Omit the end date if the tenant's installments continue until the end of the tenancy. Most of the other fields on this form are simple to understand if you've been through the introduction. However, the field OurRef up here begins with the tenancy ID, which is inserted for you, and what you type in the rest of this field will be entered on the paying in slip by the tenant or on the standing order form, and will end up printed on the bank statement coming to the landlord. Therefore it must be sufficiently detailed to allow a user to match the incoming instalment with the corresponding recurring payment. Abbreviate where you can, because some banks only accept a dozen or 16 characters. Let's demonstrate this form. I'm going to demonstrate the use of the Manage Recurring Payments form now. I'm going to use Mr. Daniel Hogan, and for the sake of this demonstration we're going to assume that back on June he broke his refrigerator and has agreed to pay £160 over 20 weeks at £8 a week. For this you need the Manage Recurring Payments form, and I'm going to click on that. And we can see that at the bottom of the form we've got recurring payments for a whole bunch of other people. So let me select Mr. Daniel Hogan, and you'll see he's already got one recurring payment, and I'm going to make a new one for him by clicking on the New Payment button. To get a new transaction ID, the category is also miscellaneous like the one that's there. This is £8 starting on the 3rd of June. And its frequency is weekly, and the end date, well, if you do the calculations you'll see that the end date turns out to be, I think, the 14th of October. The description is replacement refrigerator, Here is the reference, which is going to get printed on the standing order, and from there the bank that receives the standing order will place this reference when it makes an automated payment to the landlord's account, and that reference will hopefully be helpful when somebody at this end is posting the credit. So we'll put the abbreviated address, room 5, flat 10, Whiteley, the best we're going to get, and that's all I need do. In the way of data entry, at this stage, when I click on print and save, I will print the instalment letter and the standing order form if I click here. I don't have any stationery in the printer of my computer, so I'm going to just save it instead of doing a print and save. And that's all I have to do. Now, this form has a very bad habit of keeping lots of records locked, so I deliberately don't let you do anything else after that. The only thing to do is to close it as soon as possible. I will say that if you open this form and just use it to examine existing recurring payments, it isn't going to lock any records at all, so that doesn't matter. I'm going to close the form, and that's the end of this part of the demonstration. Now that we've seen how to post a recurring payment, I want to show you a few more of the features of the Manage Recurring Payments form. At the bottom, as you can see, if I click on any one of these lines, I'm going to bring the details of that recurring payment into the top of the screen. But please, please, please don't modify any recurring payments. Although you can type different things in here and click Save, please don't modify a recurring payment once we've started to receive money from the tenant. It can create all sorts of complications, and there's a slide about it at the end of the module where I discuss it in a little more detail. Now, you can see down here that there are two miscellaneous, well, you can't actually see because the tenant's name is not shown. So let me just bring the tenant's name onto screen because it's hidden. You can see that these two recurring payments at the bottom are both for Mr. Hogan. And I want to show the difference between the types of statement, the tenant statement and the chase-up statement, so you can see the difference. If I choose either of them and ask for the tenant statement, you can see that the debits and the credits for both of these are interspersed, which is simply because all the transactions are in date order, and that's required of any sort of statement. If you want to have a look at a particular transaction, just that transaction and no others, then use the chase-up statement. So let's look at this one for Mr. Hogan, and you'll see that he's been a very good boy. He paid his £3.50, the first of two instalments for a new set of keys. He paid that on the same day it was expected, and he paid the second instalment on the same day it was expected. The total of all the credits and the total of all the debits is both £7. The net is 0. And if he handed in his keys and wanted his rent in advance back, well, as far as this particular recurring payment is concerned, that would be no problem. If I'm looking at his other one, this is not quite such a good picture. In fact, you can see that he's been required to make, I think it's 16 payments here. No, whatever it is. And he's only actually made one payment of two instalments, £16, back on the 15th of July. So the total of the expected amount was £112. The actual received amount was 16. So he owes us effectively £96. And if I looked at a rent top-up account and did a chase-up statement for that, we'd see that yes, he did start. An instalment is due on the 1st of September for £23. No money's come in yet. Well, it's only the 7th of September. It's up to you to decide when to chase a particular payment. There's a difference, however, when I come to look at the rent in advance instalment account. This is because the rent in advance account type is a savings account. Yes, we do put debits in there whenever a payment is due, but in practice, we're not deducting money from the savings account. We're asking the man to pay, but we really are only interested in how much he has paid over the lifetime of that. So let me look at the tenant statement for that rent in advance account, and you can see that he's paid 3 lots of £35, which is 105. You can see also, and this is only found on the rent in advance account type, that the amount of rent in advance he paid as a lump sum when he took the keys, £400. So he's got a total of £505 to his credit for rent in advance. If, on the other hand, I want to look at the chase-up of that, well, I can see that he had promised on his instalment letter to pay us on the 3rd of June, the 1st of July, the 29th of July, and the 26th of August. So he'd promised to make 4 payments, and he's only made 3. So he's £35 in the red, waiting for another instalment that was due on the 26th of August. It is the 7th of September. It's up to you again to use your judgment as when is the best time psychologically to chase a man for a payment. So, that is the rest of what I want to say about managed recurring payments. Following on from the transaction statements, you will remember that Mr. Hogan has only paid 2 instalments out of the 20 instalments of £8 each that he was supposed to pay, and you saw that at the end of the statements. And if I look at the recurring payments dashboard, you can see here that he is, yes, owing £96. This double click here will take us to the recurring payments toolbox. I'm not going to spend any time on that now, but you can see the details of the recurring debit that he owes £96. We'll come back to that later. What I want to talk about here is the difference between this dashboard and the Let 'em See amount owing dashboard that's part of housing benefits. The housing benefits dashboard is updated only once a day when the amounts owing are imported from Let 'em See, whereas on the recurring payments dashboard, people will be looking at the bank statements during the day, picking up credits and wanting to post them, and that might make a difference to what's on here. So let's simulate that. Let's assume that a payment has come in from Mr. Hogan, and it's for one installment dated on the 3rd of September. So I'll select the tenant, Daniel Hogan, and he's got a new payment coming in, 3rd of September. It's a credit, and the reference number is 2103, and it's £8, miscellaneous, and that's all we need to capture. You can see that's now been edited. I used Control S, as I did in the introduction module, to save the data. I'm going to close that. When we go back to the recurring debits dashboard, there is no change, but if I do the refresh, then the computer will recalculate the information, and you can see now that the amount owing is down to £88. So the only thing I want you to take away from this is that if you want to use the recurring payments dashboard, then you should refresh it whenever it seems reasonable to do so. If you're going to be ringing up somebody and say, why don't you pay us some money, and they say, I paid you some yesterday, you're going to look a little bit of a fool, and it was all because you didn't do the refresh. Thank you. This is the recurring payments toolbox, and people who are familiar with the analogous housing benefit toolbox will be very familiar with this section of the form where you record the current status of what you are chasing up. Here you'll see all the actions that you've done before, exactly the same as on the housing benefits toolbox. I say exactly the same, but the case IDs here are chosen from the categories, whereas on the housing benefit, of course, they're the HB numbers. Up here is the section where you can find the details of the tenant you're trying to chase. Here we have the totals of the outstanding amounts of all the recurring payments for that tenant. In this case, utilities and rent in advance is zero. You'll notice rent top-up doesn't exist here because you should be chasing it on the housing benefit form. And also a thing to bear in mind that the totals are of all the recurring payments of the one category. Now, if Mr. Daniel Hogan had two non-performing recurring payments, then the total of both of them would be here, and the housing benefit dashboard would show two lines for Mr. Hogan, and each one would have the individual amount by which it was delinquent. So this will show the total. Don't let that confuse you. Of course, it's very unlikely to have either a pair or more of rent in advance recurring payments or utilities ones. I think that's all I want to say, except that I want to emphasize that the actions here are held for any one tenant in a very different place from the actions on the housing benefit toolbox. That's why you must not chase up the recurring benefits top-up here, because then the actions here for chasing just a top-up will be separate from the actions you recorded on the housing benefits for all other issues concerning with top-ups, and nobody will be able to get a single picture. Thank you. The next two slides show one way of handling a non-performing recurring payment. The fictitious recurring payment I'm going to demonstrate has no end date. It was expected to last until the tenancy finished. In all such cases, assume that the tenancy will last 2 years. This non-performing recurring payment would have appeared on the recurring payment dashboard several weeks ago, and I'm supposing that you chased it up using the recurring payment toolbox. But things got to the point where you had to invite the tenants to visit the office and discuss how to pay off the arrears. The calculations on this and the next slide are in preparation for the tenant's visit. They show the details for the replacement recurring payment you need the tenant to sign when he comes. In this scenario, the non-performing recurring payment was for £18 every 2 weeks on the 3rd of March 2014. Today is the 9th of June, and the tenant should have paid 8 lots of £18. Instead, he's only paid 3 instalments, which total £54. There's no end date, so we'll use a notional duration of 2 years, making the end date the 3rd of February 2016. The first thing to do in practical terms is to terminate the recurring payment as of today, the 9th of June 2014. The statement, if you were to take one, will show a debt of £90. The basic steps for recalculation are these. The new recurring payment must have the same start and end date as the original. Take the amount owing and spread it evenly over the remainder of the recurring payment's life. This works even on recurring payments without an end date because we have assumed a 2-year life for them. Over 2 years until the assumed end date, the old recurring payment would have paid the landlord 52 lots of £18, a total of £936. However, £54 has already been paid, so the landlord needs to recover £936 minus the £54, a total of £882 by the same date. The number of payments remaining is 52 minus 8, that's 44 fortnightly payments remaining. So, start a new recurring payment from tomorrow, or the tenant's preferred start date close to tomorrow. There are 44 instalments remaining of the original 52, so the amount per instalment is £882 divided by 44, that's £20 and 5p per instalment, and that's the amount you have to get the tenant to sign for on the new instalment letter when he comes. Thank you. So we've had the last slide in the module recurring payments. I want now to summarize what we've learned in the whole of this module. Every recurring payment must be entered into the form Manage Recurring Payments. This is the only place from which you can enter a recurring payment, and it's the only place in the in-house software where you can print installment letters and standing orders. Never, without asking me first, modify a recurring payment after it is in payment. I will explain to you then what the unexpected consequences might be, but it's so easy to end the recurring payment and start a new one, You really ought to do that. The in-house software generates a debit in the tenant's account for every instalment due every day, and the recurring payment dashboard shows which recurring payments are non-performing. You must refresh the dashboard before you rely on it in case someone has recently updated the transactions. From the recurring payment dashboard, you can click through into the recurring payment toolbox, which helps you chase the payments. So that's it for tenant transactions. I hope you've learnt and understood from these two modules and maybe even enjoyed the experience. If you want to make any comments, please send them to me, john@freshstarthousing.org.uk, and I would be particularly interested in your suggestions for what topics to cover next.